let's design the permanent housing program that's going to work, keeping in mind a couple things. One is that, the reason that we feel we're at this point is because the city, as Patrick mentioned, stopped the direct link between homeless shelters and the Section 8 and public housing system. At the same time, as Christy mentioned, those systems are being defunded or underfunded dramatically by the feds, and that doesn't appear like it's going to end anytime soon. So where do the resources come from? What does the program look like? And how do we design it to resolve the worry that I think George voiced to some degree, that providing affordable housing through the shelter system is going to drive demand for the system. George, why don't we start with you for once?
So I think one of the things we need to grapple with is the fact that the public debate about this has not necessarily been the case in our small world debates, but the public debate on this question, I think, has distorted the question a little bit, which is this kind of all or nothing. We either do rental assistance at the back door of shelter or we don't. We either provide rental assistance to homeless families or we don't. And I think that that's an oversimplification that has done a disservice to our sector and a disservice to our clients. The guy living on a cardboard pallet in Times Square for the last 4 years has a different set of needs than the family that got burned out of their home last night in the Bronx. And that family has a different set of needs than the seriously mentally ill person who's being discharged without a place to live from an upstate psychiatric center and dumped in Port Authority. And that person's got a different set of needs than a 19-year-old with 2 kids who's never held a job, who's coming into the family system because she can't get along with her mother and stay within her family. So there's a very diverse group of people. We're not dealing, when you talk about the homeless population, with a monoculture. You guys know this, I know this. And so anything that we do in terms of crafting a permanent rehousing program going forward has to take that diversity into account. Now, do we have to design a completely unique solution for everybody in the system? Of course not. People kind of chunk together in groupings. But we do need, I think, to be much more sophisticated in our assessment of what people need and connecting them to the right pathways and the right services to get them to remain living self-sufficiently in the community when they leave shelter or leave the street. Part of that is also this struggle with where are the resources going to come from? And so one of the things that I would say, were I given the opportunity to advise the next administration, is the first thing is any federal housing assistance that we can get that's not already being used to build supportive housing. Because the city has been accused of removing rental assistance from homeless people, right? It's not true. HPD has continued to use project-based Section 8 and federal housing assistance to build supportive housing through all of these years. We've continued to rehouse thousands of homeless veterans using HUD-VASH. So there's always been some federal housing assistance here. But what we can gain access to, I think we need to target to those folks who are not going to be able to leave the shelter system on their own steam, meaning through employment income or through their own resources. We've got people in the system, both the singles and the family system, who are disabled psychiatrically. They have substance abuse disorders. They have chronic medical conditions. And I think that we need to target our the most valuable resources, the federal housing resources, to those people who need that assistance to live self-sufficiently in the community. Now, if we still have resources at the end of the day, then I think we need to begin to target for people, for example, families who have been repeat returnees to the shelter system. I mean, that's an indication that this family is having a lot of difficulty remaining independent in the community. Let's bump them up the list as well. At that point, we have to start thinking about what about the rest of the folks in the system? And then it becomes a financial question. Can the city and the state cobble together enough resources to create some kind of rental assistance short-term? And we do this a lot now, those of you who are in the shelter business. I mean, we use HRA, TANF one-shot deals all the time. We use FEPs all the time. So what can we cobble together to help people who are leaving on their own employment income land in the community and remain there? What kind of short-term rental assistance can we create? But the bottom line is, however we parse this out, we need to be more sophisticated than treating the homeless population as a monoculture. We need to figure out what category folks fit into and what kind of services they need to remain independent in the community.
So I think as I said earlier, learning from mistakes of the past is a way of avoiding making those mistakes again. Learning from what worked in the past is very much a way of learning how we can move forward and how I think a next mayoral administration can work forward. Let's keep in mind that the next mayor is going to inherit a homelessness crisis of unprecedented scale. Having said that, the next mayor is also going to have an opportunity to look back at what worked so well under previous mayoral administrations and what we have learned over 30 years of working on the front lines, of experience, of really amazing academic research, policy research. And I think it's important to recognize where we are now historically in terms of that conceptual research work. We're at a virtual consensus about what works. With all due respect to George's comment about the diversity of the populations, we do know a lot about what really works for the majority of people who experience homelessness. We know that for families, particularly families who are very low income, working poor, unemployed, that permanent affordable housing, like public housing, like Section 8 vouchers, like subsidized, long-term subsidized housing, works to get those families out of homelessness and keep them out of homelessness. We know that from the national research. We know that more than anything from the experience here in New York City. The Bloomberg administration itself, back in the first term, commissioned an amazing study by the Vera Institute that came to exactly the same conclusion. Other academic researchers have found the same. We know that that's what works. We also know that done right, it can save money that we're spending on the shelter system. The city's independent budget office did an analysis last year, taking a recommendation that we saw from our city council and our city council speaker, who last year said that the city should return to the previous practice of targeting 2,500 public housing apartments each year to help homeless families leave shelter, move into permanent housing, something that worked so well under previous mayoral administrations and actually worked very well under Mayor Bloomberg's first term to reduce family homelessness. The IBO found that you would reduce the numbers of children and families who are experiencing homelessness, and you would save millions of dollars spent on the shelter system. That's a win-win for homeless families and for the taxpayer, and it's something that's the kind of thing that the next mayor needs to be doing. Secondly, look to the lessons of Mayor Koch's historic Housing New York 10-year housing plan. A plan that, when Mayor Koch passed away recently, many people lauded as maybe his major legacy and the ways that it helped revive, neighborhoods in this city, but also created housing for homeless families and individuals in amazing numbers. Of the 150,000 housing units that were built or rehabbed under Mayor Koch's plan, fully 10% of them, 15,000 apartments, went to homeless families and individuals in a way that reduced family homelessness significantly in the late 1980s and early 1990s. So those are things that we can build on. Unfortunately, Mayor Bloomberg's equally ambitious housing plan doesn't do as much for homeless people. Less than 4% of all of the housing that's been created under that plan has gone to homeless households at a time of higher homelessness. So again, the next mayor can learn from the lessons, the positive lessons of Mayor Koch's 10-year housing plan. And then I would also say that Mayor Koch's plan targeted a lot more housing that was built to the poorest New Yorkers. 60% of all of the housing units built under Mayor Koch's plan went to very low-income households in the city, whereas only about a third of the housing units created under Mayor Bloomberg's plan go to very low-income folks. So there we see we need to be doing more with city resources to make sure that we're reaching homeless families and individuals and we're reaching folks. And then let's talk about permanent supportive housing. Obviously, the New York 3 agreement, the recent commitments that have been made under the Medicaid reforms are going to do a lot to add to the stock of permanent supportive housing, but we know that it's not enough. We know there's still enormous need out there on the streets and in the shelters. There's still enormous need that's there. We need to be expanding those commitments in a big way in partnership with the state to make sure that we're building more permanent supportive housing for those folks. Those are things that we have learned over 30 years that work. Those are things we've also learned over 30 years are cost effective. They don't require a lot of money. They require, in some cases, making investments that will lead to cost savings down the road. In some cases, as in the case of targeting federal housing resources to help homeless kids and families, we know that by doing that, we'll literally save city and state tax dollars and reduce homelessness. So there's a real question, why aren't we doing that? And that's something I hope the next mayor will do.
Do you want to jump in?
then went ahead and read those.
I'm a little conscious of the time, and we've spent a lot of time talking about shelter and permanent housing, which is appropriate. But being conscious of the time and being conscious of our subject, I did want to make certain that we didn't allow an important point to escape. Thinking about what I was going to say this morning, and thinking that we might at some point be asked what are your top things that you would recommend to the next mayor, we really haven't gotten to the thing that I put at the top of my list, and I don't want to allow that to slip. I think, given the public flogging that our current mayor has taken with respect to ambitious goals that he set, I kind of doubt that the next mayor is going to stick his or her hand in that same meat grinder. On the other hand, I do think that there are a couple of things, and one in particular, that the mayor can commit themselves to do that I think would have a huge impact for a relatively modest investment. I think that given the success that the administration has had to date reducing street homelessness and creating programs that are highly effective at addressing street homelessness, that the next mayor could commit him or herself to eliminating chronic street homelessness in the first term. I think it's a doable goal, and I think we can even quantify within certain limits what it would take to get there. I believe about a $25 million investment would eliminate chronic street homelessness in New York City. We have 500 safe haven beds that we've put into place as of today. Another 500 safe haven beds would cost about $18 million. That would make a huge step forward in getting people from the street into a safe place tonight. We could then take a portion of the permanent supportive housing portfolio and make certain that we dedicate some of those units to folks who are coming in off the street. One of the areas where we've had less success is in the public transportation system. I think one of the pieces of advice I would give the next mayor is you've got to bring the homeless outreach operation related to the public transportation system, especially the MTA, under the responsibility of DHS. DHS needs to be responsible for all of the street homeless operation in New York City. If any of you have been to Penn Station at night in the last several years, it's horrible. I mean, it's almost like you're not in New York City. We've addressed this issue in so many places. We've addressed, I can't even count, Jody Rudin can tell us how many encampments we've taken down in New York City over the last few years. But Penn Station is full of floridly mentally ill people who are in terrible condition. $25 million in a budget of $1 billion is not really a lot of money. And I think that if we focused on developing the safe haven portfolio, if we focused on giving the street outreach operation responsibility for the shelter system, and if we focused on making real housing at the back door of the safe havens available to people living on the street, I think we would see an elimination of chronic street homelessness in 4 years.
We would love to see, from the United to End Homelessness campaign, we need to have an interagency council. This is being called for all over the country. We need to unify principles. We need to be unifying our budgets and our, I know DHS gets, the total budget for homelessness is about $1 billion, but it's much more than that. And we're not using our resources the right way because we know that these other systems feed into that. We need to be working with those other agencies to really unify our goal on ending homelessness in New York City. That means we need to have all those other departments like probation and parole and DFTA, all those people in the room to really stay committed strong to this issue. There are a couple other pieces related to, where do we find the money? How do we do this? I think absolutely a commitment to reinvestment has to be there. Because I'm absolutely convinced that we're going to be able to drive down the shelter numbers. What are we going to do with that money? We don't want it to go back into the general coffers. We want that to go back into a system that says we don't ever want to have this problem again. How do we do that? We do that by building affordable housing options. We do that by incentivizing small landlords to take our clients and helping them transition into working with our clients or our clients getting the aftercare they need in order to maintain their housing. We need to do things like by creating an interagency council, we need to look at standardizing processes and not overburdening community providers who are trying to build housing or community agencies that are trying to help us do that. We need to make it as easy as possible to develop housing, to retain housing, to maintain housing, and to stabilize communities. But right now we have so many different regulations and rules that right now it just makes it impossible for us to really do that well. That goes to siting. We need to be talking about how siting issues happen in New York City. There's a lot of confusion about that. I think we need to have some real discussion and dialogue in that area. And then I think, you know, another piece that we know how to do this. We've done it before. We have New York 3. So I would like our next administration to sit down with the people who created New York 3 and use it as a model. It's not perfect. There's no perfect model, but the point is that we did it and we can improve upon it, and we need to use that as a first stepping stone, because we must create, you know, we're calling for 10,000 more units of supportive housing. Less than 10% of current units are for families. In New York City, that is the largest percentage of chronic homeless in New York City. So we need to begin talking about that, but we have a model, we know how to do that, and I would challenge the mayor to do this as soon as possible. First week in office, let's start talking about putting this together with all the right players. And I don't just mean the city agency people, I'm talking about getting all the stakeholders. That includes some of our federal, our state providers, our partners, as well as advocates in the room and consumers in the room, because that's the only way that this will succeed, and it will hold all of us accountable, because we must make a public compact to address homelessness.